Tenakoto katoa. Welcome to the series premiere of The Youth Factor, where we aim to see the world through the lens of the future. This show invites passionate and inspiring youth from all around the world to share their perspectives and experiences on both the beauties and the issues of nations worldwide. I'm your host, Alex Jung, and I hope to take you on a virtual journey around the world where stories untold will be shared, current issues will be discussed, and the voices of the youth will be heard. Without further ado, we begin our journey in the heart of Europe. Proudly named the land of chocolate, beer, and diamonds, this country is home to amazing food and culture. With the Grand Place in Brussels considered one of the most beautiful squares in Europe and recognized by the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the Atomium, this country may be small but packed with stunning architecture and a united population. That's right, our journey begins in Belgium. And joining me today is our guest host, Mira van Hove. Mira is from Antwerp but is currently studying at the United World College's ISAK in Japan. Welcome, Mira.
Hi, so my name is Mira. I'm 17, and in my free time, I love to cook, spend time with my friends, and when I get really stressed, I start sewing.
Mm.
Um, I'm half Belgian, half Indian, but I've grown up in Antwerp my entire life, which is in Belgium. And I think there are a lot of wonderful things about this country, but also a lot of things that could improve. But after going to Isaac, I think I got a different perspective on Belgium because I kind of went away and I could compare it to other countries. So there are a lot of things that I learned to enjoy more, but also a lot of things that I realized that this is something we as the next generation need to work on.
Mm. Could you tell me a little more about Antwerp as a city? Because I think lots of people know about Brussels from Belgium, but maybe not so much about Antwerp.
Yeah. So Antwerp, I think, is in the top three biggest cities of Belgium. And what makes us a very big city is that we have a very big port. So that is also where a lot of people work. It's a very good source for jobs. And um, generally, we're kind of more towards the Netherlands, so more on the top side of Belgium.
Mm.
Um, and personally, I think it's the best city in Belgium, but obviously that's biased because I've lived here my whole life. So
Mm.
yeah.
And so you speak French and or is it
Oh
Dutch?
no. So Antwerp is in the Dutch speaking part, so I
Oh.
speak Dutch,
Mhm.
but I have been learning French at school since I was like 10 years old.
Well, I'm extremely grateful to have you on the podcast, Mira. So let's get
Thank
started.
you.
The first topic of discussion is the political divide, which you described as the root of many issues. I can certainly tell it's a very critical issue at the moment. Following Charles Michel's forced resignation in December 2018, there was a period of 652 days with caretaker and minority governments, and the effects of this have been very clear. I'll lay out a quote from the New York Times. Belgium's unique federal system, with its regional governments and linguistic communities, has made it difficult for the central government to coordinate a unified response to the pandemic. Could you please explain how the government structure actually works? Because I think it is very layered and confusing to an extent. I'd also like to ask a little bit about political families, such as the Open Flemish Liberals and Democrats in the same family as the Reformist movement. This is a very unusual and intriguing structure of government, I must say. So could you please expand upon this?
Yeah, so basically in Belgium, we have six parliaments, which is a lot for a very small country.
Mm.
Um, so obviously we have the federal government where we have all the ministers and the prime minister.
Mhm.
And then we have the so then we have two governments that are based on location.
Right.
So we have we say in Dutch the Wallonse, which is like French speaking,
Mhm.
and then the Flemish government. So they decide on things like agriculture because that's like linked to your location.
Certainly think it's interesting how there's six parts of government and how it
Mm-hmm.
depends upon the region and the language that they speak. Um,
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I'm very surprised by the fact there was no major government for over a year, coming on like a year and a half, is it?
Mhm.
Did that
Yeah,
affect
yeah.
your life in any way or form, or?
It did impact the citizens of Belgium a lot in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Mm.
Because they tried, so basically Belgium kind of splits up everything in terms of location and in terms of which language they speak there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very rare that they actually operate as one nation. But
Mm.
then with things like the COVID-19 pandemic, you had to operate as one nation because it couldn't be that on one side you have to wear a face mask and then you walk 10 meters to the other side and you don't, like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, basically there was like a lot of issues. And then when they finally did get a government, the like temporarily prime minister, she like loosened the restrictions because there was a lot of like protests from citizens.
Right.
But then she did that because knowing that she wouldn't have to handle the consequences. But then when, let's say, the real government took over,
Mm.
then it became stricter again, which then a lot of people thought, oh, this is because the new government is bad. But that was actually because the patients were increasing in the hospitals because the previous temporarily prime minister had
Right.
loosened the restrictions. So it's really complicated, which I think that is also like, as I said, it's like the root of some issues that it
Mm.
is so complicated. And in a democracy, citizens are said to have a voice, that they can also act and that they can also have input. But when the system is so complicated, it makes it really hard and really inaccessible to kind of act up and to speak up. And it makes it very like disencouraging to actually make change, I believe.
Mm.
Because
Mm.
personally, if I were to have an issue, I would find it very hard to know where to start and who to talk to, which obviously that's going to be in a lot of countries. But I think because Belgium is so small and then has a six government parliaments, like it just doesn't work.
Mm. So I think you touch upon the next part of the question, which is about this divide between the Dutch-speaking Flanders and the French-speaking Wallonia. So
Yeah.
is this divide very evident, and how is this impacting Belgian politics?
Okay, so I actually did my GP case study builder on this. So we have so basically in the French speaking part, they tend to vote more left wing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the second biggest party is like a very extreme left wing party,
Yep.
whereas here in the Dutch speaking part in Flanders, people tend to vote very right wing.
Right.
And
Mm.
um, these right wing parties, one of their approaches is very nationalistic. So actually, this morning I got an ad of Vlaams Belang, which is a very big party that
Mm-hmm.
is very nationalistic, being saying, "Oh, vote for us, be proud of your nation. Let's get rid of the left wing Walen, which is like the French speaking part, because one of the things that they have on their agenda that they want to achieve is actually to get Flanders to be independent."
Mm.
Now, personally, I don't really think it's going to happen in the nearby future,
Right.
um, because it does make a lot of things like harder and it will cause a lot of problems,
Mm.
because Belgium is also like Brussels is the capital of the EU. So then what happens with Brussels? Because in
Mm.
Brussels they speak French, but it is in Flanders, which is the Dutch speaking part.
Right.
Um, and
Oh,
then
that. Mm.
also, like, the thing is where this lays, like one of the roots of this like feeling that they want to like split up because they feel like Flanders is better than Wallonia and they shouldn't be together, and Wallonia is just like bringing them down. It's kind of how they um promote it, is
Mm.
because if we go back in time, Wallonia would be more powerful because the French is the language of the elites. They had all the mines. They,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
that's where all the money was coming from.
Mm,
And in Flanders, it was just farmers. But
mm,
now it has shifted because the international airport is in Brussels. So in Flanders, we have the port, which is like massive economic benefit. So now it's actually Flanders that's more um, wealthy and has more money, because
right.
also they're also more involved in international businesses.
Mm,
So now they feel like, oh, okay, why are we still like together with Wallonia when they're like not at our level, kind of?
mm,
So this is one of the things that's behind it. But then they promote it as just nationalism, where they say, oh, we don't want to be part of these left-wing um, French-speaking people, not because they speak French, but that's just, how they differentiate.
mm,
Um, and the thing is, in Belgium, um, why it works is we have a lot of, and this is really, really sad to say,
yeah.
but we have a lot of people from older generations in Flanders, and often they don't like change. And
Yeah.
it's also very much like the average Flemish person doesn't like to take risks,
Mm,
and they don't like change, and they just want to stay in their comfort zone. So
mm,
one of the things that they use as their approach is one of their arguments is that there are more foreigners in Belgium now.
right.
And one thing we see, for example, is obviously what we see all around the world is that less foreigners are accepted for their jobs. And
Mm,
then some people say this is racism. Some people say this, there are several things that are said about this.
mm,
But one theory that is very interesting to me that is that in Belgium, even if the people in the company are not racist, often it is because they don't like taking risks, and they don't know this person has grown up in another country. Maybe they have different ideas. Maybe
mm,
language barrier might be an issue, and they don't want to take the risk of kind of sacrificing a part of their business.
mm,
So this is like one of the like theories, let's say, that's like
yeah.
kind of relatively new, but that also counts for a lot of citizens here, that they don't want to take a risk to let in foreigners in the society.
Mm,
And this then often also just becomes racism.
yeah.
So, for example, we have one area in Antwerp, which is called Borgerhout.
Mm-hmm.
And in this place, there are a lot of people from Morocco that live there,
Yeah.
because, and even though they've lived here for like generations, because their parents came, most of them, for the mines,
Mm,
um, they live here. And then Vlaams Belang made posters
yeah.
saying, do you want Borgerhout or Borgerokko?
Mm,
So saying, if we let in these people, they're gonna take over our neighborhoods and
oh,
they're gonna make it their own.
mm,
Which obviously is very shocking if you're just biking to school and you see this poster.
absolutely.
And yeah, and then now they're also trying to make they've started on TikTok, like they're using social media to get to the like younger generations as well, because most of the time their voters are older,
Mm,
but still it's very, I don't know, for me it's very frustrating to see how this works, because it's a clear example of propaganda, because they don't have any
definitely.
proof that this is what is bringing our country down or whatever they claim to say.
Mm,
But I do get ads on my phone being like, oh, like, let's get rid of the woke movement. Let's get
yeah.
rid of the radical left wings. You know what I mean? And that's very shocking to see that it still happens
Mm,
in my country, which Belgium is, from the outside, it's seen like people see it as a wealthy and like
yeah.
progressive
Yeah.
country.
Definitely.
And then yes, we have good parts, but then there are also parts that are very disappointing to me
Mm.
because, yeah.
I think one of the things you bring up is that this kind of divide between the Flanders and the Wallonias, it doesn't just affect Belgian politics, it impacts European politics in general. Because, like you mentioned,
Mm,
Brussels is where the EU is held, and I didn't even think of that as a valid point until now. But that can be a very big point of discussion and controversy if these two, parts split up. And also when you have right wings and left wings that are completely different in ideology in one country with the six branches of
mhm.
government, I can imagine it gets very, very complex. And so
Yeah.
there's this idea that we call hypothetical partition, right? Which is the idea that Belgium is going to split up where the Flanders and Wallonia become separatist states. And I know that in Europe, Catalonia is probably the most famous example for separatism movements, right?
Mhm.
There's been theories that Flanders would join the Netherlands and Wallonia would join France, Luxembourg. It
Yeah.
wouldn't happen in the near future, but could you see this as a realistic scenario that could potentially happen? And what are the immediate consequences as a result of this?
I think what like I think this obviously I'm not gonna say it can happen because you never know.
Hmm.
But I think a scenario that's more realistic is that I can't remember the name, but basically um Flanders and Wallonia, they act as like two different states,
Even right
but
now?
no, this is like hypothetically, this
Okay.
is what could happen.
Hmm.
So they basically act like two different states, but then like in theory, they're still the same country, but they act completely different. So
Right.
I think that could happen because I think splitting up, there are a lot of like economists and scientists and stuff like that. They will like kind of bring like reason hopefully to the politicians and tell them like this is insane because we're already such a small country, why would we split up?
Right.
And I think especially economically it's not going to be beneficial for both sides, even if
Mm.
like Flanders thinks that it will be beneficial for them. We get most of our like food from the French speaking part because that's where the farmers are. So then for Flanders, we're going to have to import more food, and that will also be another economic cost.
Mm.
So I think the realistic situation is that they split up the governments even more so that we don't have that the federal government doesn't decide anything.
Oh.
But then in theory they're one nation, but then in reality they just operate as two different states.
Mm. So they wouldn't really split up because there's no real benefits for either side that they'd really
I
gain much.
think so. And also like from what like because the two big parties in Flanders that want to split up is N-VA and Vlaams Belang.
Hmm.
And from what I've heard from them, it is more because they want to prove that the Flemish people are the superior and that like we're stronger and whatever. And if they operate as a different state, then they can like do whatever they want. But then at least we're still one country.
Right.
So yeah.
Mm. Well, I think it's a very complex situation, and the
Mhm.
whole idea of states splitting up is not very usual, I think, in recent politics.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 because there has been quite a lot of criticism, not just in Belgium, but in Europe in general, for the lack of testing, delayed lockdowns. Um,
Mm-hmm.
how has specifically this political divide, I think you talked about it a little bit with the mask situation where um,
Mm-hmm.
you would walk 10 meters and there's different policies, but
Mm-hmm.
how has political divide actually contributed to the sort of response Belgium has had? And do you have any specific examples of really kind of poor government decisions that really impacted citizens on a large scale?
I think they did kind of the rules were like for the whole country.
Mhm.
So it was the federal government making the rules, like the temporary one. So that was a very like it should be the bare minimum, but for Belgium it's a very good thing.
Mhm.
But then because the ideologies are so different in the two parts, they got a lot of criticism, and that impacted the like rules that they implemented, which were often just did not make sense at all. Like
Right.
at one point we had a rule where so basically they made this concept of bubbles
Mm-hmm.
where you had a bubble of people that you could see.
Mm.
But then you could see a bubble of people of 15 people
Yeah.
every week, and that bubble could change every week.
Oh,
Which then why do you even have the bubble? You know what I mean?
very
So
counterproductive. Yeah.
then that was because from one side they were getting, oh, we need looser restrictions. This is too strict. And then the other side was, oh no, we need restrictions. We can't just let everything go.
Mm.
So then you have these restrictions that are basically like making a rule to make a rule because it doesn't really make sense.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that impacted a lot. And then the French speaking part, they often get their inspiration from France.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Dutch speaking part from the Netherlands, we get our inspiration from the Netherlands or a bit more international.
Right.
That's also like a reoccurring pattern that we see, that the Flemish part takes their like inspiration internationally. So
So I'd like to move on to the second point of discussion, which is inclusivity in Belgium. I think it's very easy to overlook the issues of diversity and inclusion of those countries that are generally categorized as liberal. So I strongly believe there are always like points of improvement. So what do you see as the greatest issues regarding inclusivity in Belgium?
So I think the first thing is obviously what I talked about earlier, that in a lot of companies and also in the parliaments, we don't see a very diverse like crew of people that work there.
Mhm.
And I think that part of that is, sadly to say, racism. And then part of that is also the like being scared to take a risk, what I said earlier.
Mm.
I think the second thing is that in a lot of schools, you need to have a lot of like, obviously it is doable, but it is really hard to graduate from high school without having any support from parents or tutors or whatsoever. Um, so I think that is something where Belgium needs to improve a lot, where students, where their parents did not graduate high school or don't have a university diploma, they have a big disadvantage in a lot of the schools.
Mm.
And then what happens is you kind of get a divide. So some schools will have a lot of like middle class students, but then some schools, they have students where they don't get that much support from their parents, but then the level in those schools is significantly lower, which then also again decreases their chances in university, for example.
Mm.
So Belgium is trying to, like, not Belgium, there are like organizations that are trying to help in terms of this. So now in the last exam period in June, there were a lot of like study places.
Mm.
So like museums and all places in Antwerp, they opened and they made study places for students to go to if they can't focus at home. And then there are people there that can answer questions, and people that can, you know, in general, just they have snacks and water and stuff like that, which is really good because then you make sure that everyone can access like a quiet and good study environment.
Yeah.
But there is still a big problem in like not everyone has same chances in education, which then also the inclusivity for tomorrow, like for in the future,
Mm.
it impacts that a lot because if it is only the same people that can get the same degrees, then it's also going to be the same people in the same jobs, if you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
um so I think that is like a big issue like for work, but then also for school.
Mm-hmm.
And then besides that, like there is still a lot of racism, even though we're like liberal, seen as a liberal country. And this is also what I see in like my day-to-day life. And then sometimes it's like small comments that the person making the comment doesn't think that like it will have a big impact, but
Yeah.
then it is very hurtful to the person receiving the comment, and then they also don't feel like, oh, I belong here, or oh, I'm safe here, or even like I'm wanted here. And I think that is also a big part where to be inclusive, we also need to ensure that people feel safe here and that they feel like, okay, I'm welcome here. And I think that is something that Belgium needs to work a lot on.
Mm.
And now with parties like NVI and Vlaams Belang, like I think like in that aspect, we're going steps back instead of steps forward.
Right.
Like with the posters that I mentioned,
Mm.
like that is again an example of extreme racism where
Yeah.
that also impacts a lot of people's like thinking, and even kids, if they see that, they might joke about it at school to their Moroccan friends, and then that for them is very hurtful. So I think it's also in some terms kind of a cycle that keeps going on. So
Mm.
we are going to have a big effort to break that cycle. And yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Morocco as well. And I didn't know that basically Morocco and Turkish communities, they make up around 10% of Belgium's demographic.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see a lot of Islamophobia in Belgium, would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I do. Um I think the thing is like often, like as I said before with the schools, it's very divided.
Yeah.
So um in Antwerp we also have a very big Jewish community.
Oh, yeah.
Um and they have like their own school. So like
Oh.
I don't think I have ever talked to like an Orthodox Jewish person, because they go to different doctors, different supermarkets, different schools.
Oh.
And it's very weird because I see them on the streets. We
Mhm.
bike on the same street, stuff like that. But it's like they live in a total different like universe.
Wow.
Whereas with the Moroccan and the Turkish communities, that is more um often it is that we go to different schools based on like how the school promotes themselves. In my year we were 40 students, and there was only one girl that was she was Moroccan, half Turkish.
Mhm.
um so there it's already kind of a divide. But then also in the streets you will hear like old Belgian ladies make comments on the tram or whatever, stuff like that.
Mm.
So yeah, I do think it is very, very present, unfortunately.
Mm.
But I feel like in some way for a lot of people in Belgium, it's like such like the like Moroccan and Turkish communities, I don't see it as like, wow, this is so special. Like for me, it's becoming normal that they're a big part of the city that I live in and the country that I live in. But for a lot of people, unfortunately, that is
That's
not normal for them yet.
mm.
Like for example, in the World Cup, when Morocco won from Belgium, there
Yeah.
were so many riots on the street, which was very, very sad. So it
Yeah.
started with like celebration, but then like the police came because they thought it was going to be like riots, and
Mm.
then it also ended up in riots because like some say it's because of like underlaying like anger towards, because like Belgians have always been discriminating against them. um so that was a very, very big thing that
Yeah.
in so many aspects they have always like been not in all aspects, actually. They have always been a minority and in a lot of cases discriminated against. So then this time they beat Belgium. So that was like a very big thing going on in Antwerp and in Belgium in general. Yeah.
I remember seeing the news article segment on that, seeing the Belgian riots, and at the time I didn't know why it was happening. I just thought it was quite unusual to have this much outrage from a World Cup match. But now
Yeah.
there's actually underlying racism behind that. We can see the concern of it. This is one of the last questions, but I'm gonna ask about LGBTQ rights while we talk about inclusivity. So Belgium does have a lot of progressive values. I believe the most recent government is also a left-wing party. Um, do you think there are any outlying challenges though when it comes to LGBTQ rights in Belgium?
So I think the government now is not very left wing. It's very right wing, actually.
Oh, is it? Sorry.
Unfortunately, it's centrist.
Okay,
But for the LGBTQ rights, I think like in terms of like rights, what's decided by the government, we're at a relatively good place now. But I think again, what the main issue is that amongst citizens, amongst people don't really accept it yet. Or they can't wrap their head around it, they can't understand it, or they think it's all like too much and it's all like for nothing or whatever. So I think if you look in theory,
yeah.
the LGBTQ rights are good. In reality, they do face a lot of discrimination. So yeah, I think like there are still like people will stare at you and stuff like that. Or like I think amongst the like our generation in general, like in my friend groups and at school, everyone is really open about it. But then that's probably also just a bubble that I'm in. But besides that, like I think amongst the citizens in Belgium, there should be more education and there can be way more acceptance of, okay, people just love who they love and they like be who they are, you know what I mean? And yeah, I think that's it.
I love the way Google describes the Open Flemish Liberals and Democrats, though. They describe it as a conservative liberal political party. I thought that's quite interesting that they describe it as conservative liberal because those are two antonyms. So to say a party holds both the values is very unusual. But yeah, so thank you so much for sharing. Are there any last words you'd like to say about any of the topics we discussed today, or any ways the youth can make an impact or difference?
I think like what we talked about a lot is the divide in Belgium. And from my perspective, I feel like Belgium as like a quite wealthy country, we kind of have like a responsibility to in a sense be like a leader. Like for example, for climate change, I feel like we have the resources, we have the money to actually start changing our habits and move towards a better climate policy. But then I feel like that divide, not only the divide, there are a lot of other issues, but the divide does make it harder to kind of achieve those goals and to like actually make things into practice. Like obviously in every government, it takes a long while to actually, if you have a proposal for something, actually make it happen.
Yeah.
But I feel like in Belgium, it does take a bit longer because of that.
Yeah, just the kind of environment that Belgium has. There is already a lot of political divide. Well, yeah, thank you once again, Mira, for joining in this episode and representing Belgium. And this wraps our series premiere episode of the Youth Factor. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you look forward to the next stop of our journey, mainland China. Thank you very much.